Hi, I'm Dr. Dorinda Rolle, and I will be presenting along with the SA Beacon a four-part webinar series on organizational ethics. If you're a leader within a nonprofit organization, a faith-based organization, a church, or even a business, you don't want to miss this series on organizational ethics. I have spent almost 20 years working within businesses and nonprofit organizations, and I even have a doctorate in organizational leadership. So I will be talking about organizational ethics as it applies to leaders within organizations. The four things that I am going to cover in the workshop include, of course, defining what are organizational ethics. I want to also help you to gain an understanding of the potential impact of ethics on an organization, as well as looking at how organizational culture impacts ethics within the organization. So in part two of the webinar series, I want to talk about the effects of unethical behavior in organizations. There's several things that happen when people who are within the organization observe what's going on, and maybe they don't like it, or sometimes they do take part in it. The first thing that happens is there becomes a loss or a lack of trust within an organization. So when people see things that happen, now trust has been broken, because sometimes we see that individuals who operate in an unethical manner suffer no consequences. There may even be things in an employee handbook, or perhaps you have your code of conduct or a list of organizational values, and we see that those things are not being adhered to. Now I don't trust within the organization anymore. Another thing that happens is employee turnover. Whenever I see that happening over and over again, that is a cue to me that there may be some unethical behavior that happens. I've also had the opportunity to work as a consultant to several organizations where I interview employees about the culture of the organization, and they will usually tell me that they're leaving or that other people have left. And when I inquire about, well, why are people leaving at such a high rate? Well, they will tell me that it has to do with lack of trust, things are unfair, some people get advantages that other people don't get. And so that is what happens again when we see unethical behavior in organizations. Also, high absenteeism. People just don't show up anymore. It's like they call in sick a lot. And when that happens, that creates more work for the people who do show up at work. That also leads to the high employee turnover. Now, sometimes you have people who show up for work every day, and it results in low productivity. They're there, their body, hearts, and their spirit is somewhere else. This kind of environment also leads to emotional burnout. People are emotionally tired. They don't have the energy anymore to fight for what's right or even to do their own jobs. That's when they begin to be, they don't care anymore about the organization, or sometimes the people that they're there to care about. There's also a loss of reputation. Now before this, I talked about the lack of trust, employee turnover, high absenteeism, low productivity, emotional burnout. These are all internal symptoms that we see from unethical behavior, but loss of reputation is something else altogether. That is outside of the organization. When other people outside of the organization learn about unethical behavior, and this is really important in today's environment where almost any slight or anything that goes wrong within an organization that happens to a client or a customer, sometimes even employees, it ends up on social media. And so when that happens, it didn't just happen to that one person. Now other people who engage in social media, they can also see what happened, and they feel some kind of way about this, and they feel like they're experiencing whatever happened to the person who reported it on social media. There are also financial losses. They may result or be seen as lawsuits, where people will sue the organization because of unethical behavior. That might lead to settlements, financial settlements, or other judgments. Or sometimes unethical behavior leads to other things, such as changing of laws, which in a lot of ways it's a good thing. But unethical behavior at work not only affects its victims, it also affects those who witness it and even sometimes those who commit the crime or the unethical behavior. So there is also a hostile environment that could result from unethical behavior. So when we talk about a hostile environment, it could look like this, or it could sound like this. I didn't commit the unethical act. It's not being directed towards me, but I see it and I feel it. So in other words, sometimes, to give you an example of what might be a hostile environment, the language that is being used. Certain people are being challenged in a different way. Not everybody's being treated equally. Sometimes foul language creates a hostile environment, or other language where people are threatened, or as we now hear a lot about, bullying in the workplace. That also creates a hostile environment. So examples of a hostile environment include harassment, where maybe you're harassed or you are the harasser. We also see things such as sexual harassment. And sexual harassment is, it's a big area. That could include unwanted touching, even something as simple or innocent as putting your hand on somebody's shoulder or wanting to touch somebody's hand to get their attention, or sometimes looking at somebody too long in what we might call a leering way. Or sexually oriented jokes or cartoons, sexually oriented comments, even staring at an employee's body in a way that makes that person feel uncomfortable. The law actually qualifies a hostile working place where conduct must be intentional, severe, reoccurring, and pervasive, and interfere with the employee's ability to perform his or her job. So perhaps the person who is actually creating the hostile environment, they maybe didn't mean anything by it. But if that behavior or the language or whatever is being done in the workplace interferes with the employee's ability to perform his or her job, that's considered a hostile environment. And that has led to lawsuits in many, many organizations. Something else that happens as a result of unethical behavior, and it is also unethical, and that is retaliation. Retaliation is unethical, it is illegal, and it is simply bad for business. Retaliation includes, but it is not limited to, actions that negatively impact the terms or conditions of employment. For example, salary, demotion, or somebody gets suspended for some action or perceived action, or terminated, or my employment is not reappointed. So for example, if I believe that something unethical or maybe even illegal happened in the workplace, and I spoke up about it, or maybe I defended another employee who was being bullied, I could be retaliated against based on my involvement in that, or my lack of participation in it, in the ways that I've already mentioned. My salary could be reduced or stagnant. I could be demoted or suspended or even terminated. Sometimes retaliation also includes unsupported adverse performance evaluation or disciplinary actions. So because I spoke up about something and I am being retaliated against, now it affects my performance evaluation. And so I could be rated low in an area, but there is nothing to substantiate that I didn't perform my work in a satisfactory manner. So maybe myself and another employee, we do the exact same work, we have the exact same performance evaluation. That person gets a salary increase, but I am denied a salary increase, and it's just arbitrary. There is no rhyme or reason to it. Retaliation also includes discrimination and bullying, as I mentioned. A hostile work environment is defined again as its conduct that is so offensive that it alters the condition of employment, where I can no longer go in and do my job. Retaliation also includes physical threats and/or destruction of personal or organizational property. So sometimes people will retaliate, not necessarily against another individual, but they retaliate against the organization by destroying property. When they show up for work in the morning, they are informed that their employment is no longer needed, and they are not even allowed to go back to their desk to collect their items. They are escorted from the property, usually by security or managers or a supervisor, and they're told that whatever personal effects that they have left behind will be packed up and sent to them or will be given to them in a different way. And the reason that that is done a lot of times is that we don't want someone to go back to their desk and have access to data that is important to the organization, and they'll destroy that. So that's one of the reasons why. Oftentimes, and we've seen this a lot in the news as well, people who believe that they are going to be terminated or something else adverse has happened at work, they will retaliate in another way with physical threats that not only threaten the individual that they may be upset with, but other people will kind of be, and this is a bad choice of words, in the line of fire, and they get hurt as well. So actions taken or threatened that would discourage a reasonable person from engaging in activities, such as sometimes people who want to participate in union organizing, or it doesn't even have to go that far. They just want to take advantage of FMLA, or the Family Medical Leave Act, which is their right. They're threatened with actions that are not reasonable by retaliation. They'll say, well, if you join this union, some of the other things that I mentioned already about the salary being terminated and so forth, and those things are actually illegal to do that. So when we talk about retaliation and unethical behavior, sometimes an individual will find out about things that occurred in an organization and want to report it or to correct it, and they will suffer retaliation. There is an individual, an organization, a nonprofit on the East Coast, an arts organization that provided art experiences for people who were low income, some were homeless. And within this organization, the CEO who was hired to run that organization discovered that almost $1 million had been stolen or embezzled from the organization by a bookkeeper. Well, when she reported that information to the board, and the individual who had been accused of doing that was actually a bookkeeper. This individual was not a CPA, and one of the reasons that this individual was able to get along with this almost over a 2.5-year period is because in part one, I talked about opportunity. The opportunity presented itself for that individual to steal the money or to embezzle the money. The CEO who was hired and who had actually hired the bookkeeper had actually been locked out of the system that would have allowed her to get into and to see the books. However, once she was able to hire a CPA to supervise that bookkeeper, that's when the embezzlement was discovered. Consequently, the individual who had stole the money was afraid of being prosecuted, so that individual had a friend who and this is the really crazy part, they used the company credit card to purchase acid that was thrown in the CEO's face, believing that she would be so distracted by what had happened to her that she would not be able to testify in the criminal trial of the individual who embezzled the money. But when money is involved, usually you can follow the paper trail. Almost everything today, there is going to be some kind of paper or video trail where you can see who took the money, where the money came from, where they spent it, who actually spent it, and what they spent it on. And that was the case for this individual because she discovered that the acid was thrown in her face in terms of retaliation. The CEO alleges that the board created the environment. Remember, we just talked about a hostile environment that allowed that individual to purchase the acid that she gave to her friend who threw the acid in the face of the CEO, who has now come back and is suing the nonprofit that she was hired to oversee. So not dealing with unethical behavior has consequences that are far-reaching beyond just money or someone being fired. It also can affect someone's life and their livelihood. So when we come back and talk about part 3, I'm going to talk about how you prevent and address unethical behavior in organizations.